Thank you, Dr. Lobanov. It is always a difficult task to be last in the row. So our colleagues and myself, we are going to solve this difficult problem now. Some time has been already used from our time, maybe from our discussion time. So I would suggest starting immediately, and then depending on if Professor Sipko is here or not, we can have a questions and answers session after the two presentations. If he is here, then we will see how to proceed and collect all the presentations and have the questions and answers session at the very last item. So, please, Dr. Sipko, are you here? We can see. Oh, okay.
Okay, wait a moment.
You are there. Okay,
I am here. Okay, fine.
Very good. Then let's start immediately. This session is more about the future, I guess. So at least the titles of the presentations are almost all about the impact of the COVID situation. But what are the future messages and what solutions can be found for the current situation? This is the main topic in this last session. So, first presentation will be delivered by Dr. Dejan Jovic, who is a professor at the Faculty of Political Science, Zagreb University. Please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much and welcome from Zagreb. What I can see on the screen is somebody's presentation by Mr. Juraj Sipka. So if that could be probably removed because it's not related it's not related to my to what I'm going to say.
Professor Sipko, please close down your share screen function.
And microphone as well.
We can see your presentation, and you are not the first, you are second. Hello, Professor Sipko.
Yes.
Please close down your share screen function in your computer, because we can see your slides now, and you are only second, not the first. Thank you very much.
Yes,
the second is better than the first.
Yeah, that is true. It certainly will be, especially when the first one is not an economist, and I certainly am not. And therefore, I feel a bit awkward in a conference full of economists, but I will not try to become one or to present as one, so I will stay who I am. And I'm a professor of international relations, and economic issues are, to me, of course, important, but only to the degree, to a certain degree, to which they affect international relations and positions of various countries involved. And what I will try to show in my presentation today is how this pandemic crisis first, which then produces economic crisis, and in the Western Balkans also comes jointly with, I think, the migration crisis and the crisis of identities, how this all affect position of various countries in Western Balkans. I will focus mostly on, I think I can hear somebody. Can everyone please mute the sound?
Professor Sipko, we can hear you. Please unmute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will be concerned with the effects of this crisis for the mutual relationship of the countries in Western Balkans, what they hope to achieve by using the crisis, therefore looking more positively on the positive effects of the crisis and how this can actually affect the general political situation in the region. My approach here is largely from a constructivist perspective, which actually means that images are important and perceptions of the selves and the others as well. So what I'll try to argue here is that the pandemic becomes an opportunity for the new beginning for some of the actors both within Western Balkans. By this I mean the actors that I called revisionist states, those states that are unhappy with their international position, that think they are lagging behind in economic and political and security and identity terms, because they haven't actually achieved what they planned or what's been promised to them, for example, membership in the European Union or destigmatization, such as is the case in the case of Serbia and probably Bosnia and Herzegovina too. So they feel frustrated and unhappy with their current situation. And they see the crisis, the pandemic crisis, as an opportunity to change that. But also we need to bear in mind that there are other external actors within the region of Western Balkans. By this I mean the United States under Trump. Now we will see whether Biden's USA will remain an external actor or will act jointly with the European Union as a semi-internal actor. But also in this crisis, importantly, other actors that are also increasing their power and their standing in Western Balkans and through Western Balkans, such as, for example, in particular, China, to a degree as well, Russia, but to a lesser degree, and then also possibly some other actors within the international community. So what our main argument here is that the pandemic becomes an opportunity for many, both internally and externally, who are unhappy with the current status quo in Western Balkans, and what they try to achieve is to use the pandemic as a chance, so positively, to increase their general power. I think first of all, we need to remind ourselves that the pandemics arrived suddenly and offered opportunities to those who maybe are capable of using the moment of crisis and the moment of need. I mean, here I'm talking semi-economically, I suppose, with this supply and need in terms of political power, if they are capable of doing it. But this also introduced a huge moment of insecurity, which looked at some moment, I think in March 2020, it looks as almost catastrophic. And I think even at the end of this year, what we can see is a lot of uncertainty. And this uncertainty is in the fields which are very sensitive and important in Western Balkans and other conflict areas, such as, for example, the Caucasus or Eastern Partnership. And we saw some of these conflicts already re-emerging, for example, Nagorno-Karabakh and the others. So from frozen back into the serious conflicts. I think also as a result of some actors using this moment of uncertainty and crisis as an opportunity to improve their own standing. To bear in mind, we need to bear in mind that here in Western Balkans, we are talking of 6 countries or 5. I mean, depends on how you treat Kosovo, which of course is not universally recognized. It's recognized by some, but not by all. And that in fact is what links them together, these 5 or 6 countries, is that they are in a waiting room for the membership in the European Union. That's how the region of Western Balkans has been defined, in fact. And this waiting room is becoming a permanent living room. I mean, it is in fact not a waiting room where you are waiting for something, because more and more you actually see that what you are waiting for will never come. I mean, the European Union there is a Godot somehow. It is something that's been promised, everyone is waiting for that, but it's actually not coming. And I think this produces what my colleague from Belgrade, a fantastic, I would say, security studies expert, Filipeidis, calls in his newly published book on ontological insecurity. That is insecurity about identities, insecurity about future, and insecurity about the past as well. You know, whether, for example, they all turn revisionist because they start arguing that actually the very decision to start a journey to European Union, to introduce economic reforms and political reforms was actually wrong. It leads nowhere. It leads nowhere. So therefore, there is a big question mark over, for example, it would have been wiser to link more closely with China and Russia, and maybe to imitate and copy-paste type of political order and type of dealing business and type of organizing society as it is in these other countries, not in the European Union itself. And I think especially when we look at this situation in the political sphere and compare it to the social sphere, what we will actually see is that the political elite is speaking about the European Union and European reforms, the reforms that lead to European Union, but the public opinion is turning rather cold to that. I mean, there is a significant gap between the official line, which is membership in the European Union still as the main objective, and the skeptical or indifferent attitude of the public opinion. And I think in this situation, what happened really in March this year, and what happened was perceived in the countries of Western Balkans, but also in many other countries that are members of the European Union, as a failure of European Union to respond to crisis forcefully, clearly, with a clear direction and efficiently, opened the space for political change and for venting of frustrations by both general public and, to a degree, political leaders that are dependent through the populist modes that they introduce themselves, to a degree on public opinion too. So, for example, all of a sudden, which I mean, just the most remarkable evidence of this was the statement by President of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, already in March, that the European Union has actually shown to be what it is, and what it is a fairy tale. It will not. It is not producing results. It is not helping Serbia in the moment when Serbia needs it. It is incapable of even preserving its own principles, the principle of open borders, for example, the principle of solidarity, the principle of joint forces when it comes to major crises, and that it has also been seen as being in an asymmetric interdependency relationship with, in particular, China, but to a degree also United States and others. What I mean by asymmetric interdependency, I mean that, in fact, we all know that the relationship between the two partners produces some interdependency. But of course, as you would know probably better than I, being economist, this relationship might not be equally important to both partners, and both partners might not be equally dependent on the preservation of this relationship. So, for example, in the gas trade between Russia and European Union, what we actually see there is an asymmetric interdependency which favors Russian position rather than the European Union. It's not an equal position of both sides. Now, what we now see is that, in fact, not only the European Union, but I would say also the West, United States too, actually discovered that much of their products, the things that they produce, they are not able of producing without, in new circumstances, because the transportation links are stopped, the communication channels with China and the others, who is producing components for their products, has been broken, and therefore they all of a sudden found themselves, many of them found themselves in a very serious crisis, which is not only economic, but it's also social and political, and it affects identities. And it moves, I think, in particular those who are unhappy with their current situation into from the waiting room into an expectation room, kind of expecting something new to happen, maybe the old system to collapse, maybe the European Union to completely disappear, and maybe some new order that would be more favorable for these countries to emerge through this crisis. Let me just say that, in effect, this pandemic has destabilized the usual, and it challenged the framework of the ordinary. It introduced a securitization emergency state of emergency in terms of securitization and of identities. It introduced ontological insecurity globally, not only in the Western Balkans. But it is particularly interesting from my point of view to see that the European Union found itself in such a situation, because it appears that the virus did not really emerge in it did not originate in the European Union. It originated in China and or in the US. And these two countries started quickly, organized a verbal war between themselves on who is responsible, who not. They started blaming and shaming the other, the Chinese virus and so on and so forth, for the source of the problem. So the source of the problem was not in the European Union, but the European Union found itself being in a situation of maybe becoming the biggest loser if the crisis continues indefinitely. And not only the loser in this economic sense, but also as an idea of liberal order with open borders, with freedom of movement, and with creating some kind of an alternative to sovereignist nation states. The other aspect I think we need to notice refers to an opportunity, as I said earlier, for the revisionist states to improve their position relative to more successful and more satisfied states who are advocates of status quo in political security and economic terms. I think we need to notice that, as my predecessor has just explained, that some countries in the Western Balkans have been affected more than others. For example, those who are tourist destinations, and a colleague of mine has already mentioned Croatia and Montenegro among them, and their GDP was hit hard, whereas at the same time it seems that Serbia has not suffered that much. And I think this introduced an interesting opportunity for a new development and the new balancing of powers within the Western Europe based on the results of this pandemics and the following economic crisis. I think statements by the leaders of Serbia indicated that Serbia sees the crisis as an opportunity to close the gap between itself and primarily Croatia in economic terms. I mean, we witnessed several statements by Serbian officials who were saying, okay, GDP in Croatia is down by 9%, maybe 12%, ours is only 1%. And if things continue like that, maybe there will be we will readdress the unfairness when it comes to different levels of powers within the Western Balkans. So this is not just an economic issue, but it's also one that affects identities and the sense of pride and self-respect. I think especially taken into account that in the region, as sensitive as Western Balkans is, identities are largely based on the stories we tell about the others. And I think the story in Serbia has been largely created about the other being Croatia in this case, and the other way around. And Croatia, as we know, has improved its international standing by joining NATO and European Union. And actually, when it responds to this, there's expectations somehow that, in fact, things will change because the GDP drop in Serbia will be much smaller than in Croatia. So if these things continue, there will be some new equilibrium and not the widening of the gap. Croatia's response to this, is, well, but we are members of the European Union. We rely on European funds. So you cannot catch us, in fact. In as much as we drop, it will be served and covered from the European money. So this is, but then the next question is, what if Europe is not there? What if there is no European Union in the future, if trends continue so hard, so much that countries start closing it one after another themselves to European Union? And we see trends like that in Hungary and in Poland, two countries which are now blocking exactly the European funds and their assistance in this particular crisis because they believe this is unfair to this. So I think to summarize this, that is, Serbia uses the crisis to claim first that the European Union is a fairy tale that cannot help in the moments of crisis. Secondly, that therefore membership in the European Union is not as important as it's often claimed. It cannot save the country by itself. Thirdly, that foreign policy of relying on different countries, not only the European Union, but also China, Russia, USA, and others, was much more prudent than just relying on the European Union, as shown in the moments of pandemics. And fourthly, that Serbia, if clever and well organized, can in fact benefit from the crisis, because the gap between itself and others, for example, Croatia, might narrow down. In this way, as I said earlier, the pandemic becomes an opportunity for the new beginning and for more self-respect. And the last thing is this: the pandemics has also been used not only by one country, but by all in Western Balkans to reduce stigmatization they face in international relations as a result of the Balkan Wars. Countries of the Western Balkans emphasize that they have relatively successfully dealt with pandemics and compare themselves with much more powerful economies that have failed, such as Italy, US, Spain, UK, and so on and so forth, to fail in dealing, at least initially, with such a huge health crisis. Sometimes they even blame these other countries as source of infection, for example, Austria for skiing or Italy and Spain for playing football and so on and so forth. And on a smaller scale, this also replicates naming and shaming between the countries within the region itself. To conclude, if it lasts and undermines the usual, the pandemics will shape the new power balance between countries of Western Balkans. Country that provides solution to the problem, this is very unlikely to be any from the Western Balkans, that is vaccine or cure in international relations, will certainly improve its power in international relations. Collapsing of European Union would be a serious challenge for small country member states and an opportunity for those who have been long frustrated by its hesitation and inefficiency to expand or enlarge into the European Union. And to all countries, and especially to small, the pandemic presents a challenge in terms of serious reconstruction of self-images and images of others, and thus it influences the process of identity making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jovic. This was indeed a very interesting approach from the political economy or even political side. I am very eager, and maybe during the discussions and also the other presentations, we will just get some answers to the question if these processes, political, especially political and social processes that you were talking about, can somehow deeply influence the economics hard facts, or this fundamental is solid enough or big enough not to allow major changes through these impacts.